This podcast is brought to you by the Heldridge Hotel, New Brunswick's only 4-star hotel and a preferred hotel of Rutgers football fans. The Heldridge helps you make the most of your game day weekend, providing premium accommodations in the cultural heart of downtown New Brunswick. Restaurants, bars, theaters, parks, museums, and more are only steps away. Whether you're traveling alone or with a large group, book your stay at the Heldridge and make the most of your game day weekend. Visit theheldridge.com today.
From NJ.com and the Star Ledger, welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights, with your hosts Steve Politi and Rutgers insiders Brian Fonseca and Pat Lenny. Let's start shopping.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Rutgers Rant. Politi here, Lanny Fonseca. Signs of life. That's what we got. We're holding up the newspaper. We see something from this basketball team, a victory over UCLA. I can't remember a team that needed a victory more than that team did last night. Look, we said going into this 4-game stretch that Rutgers was going to have to win 3 to be back in a good position for the NCAA tournament. Have to win at least 2 to be at least in the conversation at 1-1. So we can't sugarcoat that. It's still on the wrong side of the bubble. I wrote, you can't even see the bubble from where it's standing. I don't think that changed. But let's forget about that for a moment. Talk about this win. Does anything you saw, this is my question, right? Does anything you saw give you hope that maybe this team, maybe this is a moment, maybe we'll look back on the UCLA game and say, hey, they've figured something out. Like that this could be the start of a moment.
The journey to a stunning NCAA tournament run begins with one win over a downtrodden UCLA team with a coach that looked like he was ready to choke the ever-living life out of all of his players and the entire officiating crew. Mick Ronan is a 5'5" ball of anger that I could only admire, and very stellarly dressed, I might add, that I could only admire.
Look nice. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, a lot of things encouraged me, like a lot of things. Dylan Harper being back being the number one thing. Obviously, the offense looks completely different when he's there, kind of orchestrating the crew, beating ball screen coverages, getting to the rim and finishing, shooting threes. Like, you know, he hit a 3 to start the second half that gave Rutgers its first lead in 12 days in 127 minutes of game time. They had not led since the first half against Indiana. They were in danger of going an entire 3-game homestand without leading a game at a venue where they were once 24-6 in the span of 3 years in Big Ten play. Like, that's how much things have changed. And you know, to your point, I had kind of the obituary of the season in my head already ready. If they had lost, they would have been with a losing record this late into the season. They had only made the NCAA tournament once when that happened. That was in '89 when they won the A10 tournament. So Rutgers, essentially, if they lost last night, was going to have to win the Big Ten tournament for any hope of making the tournament. Obviously, Dylan has a big game, and I think because of that, it allowed Ace to have his most well-rounded game as a Scarlet Knight. It allowed Jeremiah Williams to play under control for the first time since Las Vegas and have his best game, arguably of the season. It allowed JaMychal Davis to really – he took one shot. That is the most welcome news of all time, right? Like, that's what you need out of JaMychal Davis. Don't take shots. Don't turn the ball over. Play hard on defense. And you saw Manny Okbole coming in and, you know, like a bull in a china shop, grabbing 4 rebounds in 2 minutes, like clearly motivated by the demotion. You saw Zach Martini finally hit a 3-pointer. I was up in the press box. I felt the relief on his face just watching him run back, like finally hitting a shot. So I think there was a lot of encouraging signs. Now, I don't think this is suddenly, you know, the spark that's going to turn everything around, but you got to start somewhere. And I think that if you could have signed up for everything that happened last night, even the way they almost blew the lead and still managed to hang on and win the game, everything kind of went in Rutgers' favor, and it's something they could build off of going into a pretty important stretch here.
Yeah.
I would just say that it felt like after juggling rotations and trying to find something and pulling straws and trying to find this magic elixir to kind of figure this thing out, it finally felt like, all right, maybe this new starting lineup is a step in the right direction. I know we'll talk about that in a minute. And it felt like more so than people trying to fill roles, that there was an actual team playing together. And I thought that's, if you're looking for hope, that was it. And maybe having the guy at the fulcrum of it, Dylan Harper, makes just a huge difference. When you put that guy in the lineup, it's a completely, it's that leader that they needed desperately, and everything kind of looked a little bit different, especially from the defensive side of the ball too.
Absolutely.
With Lathan Somerville making a big difference in the middle.
Agreed totally. Dylan's back. He's healthy. He looks like he did before he had the flu. But for me, this was Ace Bailey's best game. And I say that, and it sounds crazy that he had 39 points against Indiana. Who understand, hit every shot known to mankind. I get it. But that felt like 1 against 5 that day. It felt like he was within the flow of this team. The best game defensively. It looks like things like the light bulbs going on with him defensively, which is important. And you talked about the lineup. 4 freshmen. Dylan Grant and Tyson Acuff. Tyson Acuff was not available really at the beginning of the year. Dylan Grant wasn't even in the conversation that he would be on, like he would play at all. He was like forget it. Like he's a practice player until next year. Like they didn't think he would be a factor this year. That to me is incredible. You're benching PJ Hayes, a guy you thought would be an important player, and Jordan Durkak, who until last week we thought he was one of the 3 or 4 most important players in this team. He didn't play a minute. So I give Steve Pikiell a lot of credit for saying, look, what we're seeing here is not acceptable. We got to do something. We're going to shorten the bench. We're going to go with the guys who are playing well right now. And it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of important changes. It takes some chutzpah to put Jordan Durkak on the bench and listen to the fans who have been begging for him not to play as much, right? And I didn't realize he didn't play until about 32 minutes into the game. I saw him on the bench. I'm like, wait a minute. This guy's still on the team. I forgot he was here, right? And it does help. I think it's important for Steve to make decisions like this when Jordan Durkak was struggling and was pressing and was actively hurting his team by driving the ball into a brick wall every time, right? So maybe it'll help him the same way it felt like Ace, they found, or at least have seemed to temper him a bit, right? Like to your point, more engaged defensively, not flying by trying to block 3-pointers. And offensively, there was maybe 2 or 3 dumb shots, right? Which is a humongous upgrade from the 15 he takes per game, right? And there was a little bit of a different edge to him. I've always thought he was obviously very competitive. Sometimes he just kind of shuts off defensively, right? But there was a point where Sebastian Mack and him are going back and forth. Sebastian Mack hits a 3 in his face. The next possession, he tries to do it again, and he just smacks that shit right out of his hand on the 3-point line. One of the most impressive blocks I've ever seen. And he's talking junk to his face. Like, that was really, really encouraging because a lot of fans have given up on the season, right? Understandably so. It doesn't look like Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper have. No. That to me, and Lathan Somerville as well. That to me is a really encouraging sign that these guys are still playing at a really high level on both ends of the floor.
Yeah. You got the sense, Pat, that their pride was insulted a little bit, right? Like this was their response game. Like Dylan Harper, that was not like for Dylan Harper. To put that on tape. We heard that a lot with him. That wasn't him. He wanted to make sure that wasn't him. Ace Bailey, that wasn't me. I think that,
the other guys too, right? Like Lathan Somerville was tremendous on the glass. You just saw better. Jeremiah Williams was just way more in control and playing with that kind of leadership that's been lacking. It just seemed like everyone kind of had that reaction. Obviously, those 2 guys are always going to be the focal point. They're always going to grab the attention, but I thought it went way deeper than them. And I think everyone else kind of stepped up finally. We talked about Manny Obale, right? Like that was a huge performance for him, right? Like adding critical moments. And whenever Rutgers gets anything out of that 5 position, it's going to have a better chance to win. So I thought there was desperation from a lot of people, including the coaching staff, that finally kind of got a much needed win. And it can't be overlooked, like the momentum that this can build.
Yeah. I think that's my question now. What is this? What is this going to mean? Now you're 2-4 in the Big Ten. You're still, again, you're not in the conversation yet. This team does not exist in the NCAA tournament stratosphere. You're going on the road at Nebraska, at Penn State with this rotation. I don't know, Brian, tell me if you agree, disagree. I think you got to win both. Like, right, these are 2 of your road games. Looking at the teams you're going to play, I get you're at Northwestern maybe, but then you go to the West Coast, you're at Michigan, you're at Purdue. Like, it seems like if you're going to get road wins on this resume, it's now, right? I mean,
so it depends on what you're looking at. If you are still in the thought that they can make an NCAA tournament, earn a bid in the regular season, then yes, you have to win both of them. No doubt about it. Like, you have to start stacking wins now. And I agree that these 2 road wins are probably the most accessible remaining, right? So if you don't win these 2, you're probably not going to win a lot more down the line. if you're of my mind, where I think the Big Ten tournament is really your only option left to make the NCAA tournament is to win the whole damn thing. So all you have to do is really make the Big Ten tournament. I think you got to split them, right? Like, I think the big part of last night's win was that they are out of the relegation zone of the Big Ten. They're not in danger, at least not at this point, of becoming one of the last 3 teams and missing the tournament altogether, which obviously spells the end of your season. So to answer your question, I think you have to win at least 1 to keep on pace to make the Big Ten tournament. If you win 2, I wouldn't say you're back in the NCAA tournament conversation, but you're chipping away and kind of making up for some, losses earlier in the season, and you're giving yourself a chance to have some hope to maybe potentially take a step forward and hopefully, perhaps, maybe have a chance in February to build a resume.
The great way to put it. You're giving yourself a chance to have a chance. I like that.
That's good. But like, if you can't win these 2 games on the road, like, what's the point of being in the tournament anyway? Right? Like, you're not going to win a game anyway. So like, what difference does it make? You're playing, like, we're building this crazy expectation for something that's it is what it is. But sorry, that's just some narcissism. They should, if they play like they win, if they play like they played last night, they got a shot in these 2 games, and then that sets you up for the huge showdown in Madison Square Garden with that's the kind of like season changing moment. Right.
Then you're there. You're in the Garden. You're playing Michigan State, a ranked team. All of your fans are going to be, and that's the thing I noticed. And people were in our Discord talking about it. And it was interesting. Like at the beginning of that game, looking at some of the crowd photos, it wasn't there. But looking at some of the crowd photos, you got the sense like people are already like, oh, this is, And then the first half, UCLA comes out and they're like, well, all right, let's get this over with. And then for them to win, like I think that you're back. The juice is back, and people at least have a little bit of hope. 2 wins. If they win these 2 games, I get it. It's a big ask for a team that's 1-6 away from. I understand it, but if they win these 2, you get back to the Garden. That place is going to be red and crazy. It's going to be an atmosphere like. I mean, I think you can paint a picture of what that's going to be like, right? I mean, that's something to play for. And and that's all. And again, like after losing the Purdue game, we haven't done a podcast since then. After that loss, the way it looked, the way it felt, just the margin of defeat, the sense that the thing was over already. The idea you'd have something to play for, to me it is a big deal.
Yeah, look, if you win these 2 road games and you go to MSG and win that game, when, let's face it, that's when the New York papers and the national media are going to pay attention. Saturday, MSG, 1:30, the Mecca, like that's going to have the attention. You win that game, a 3rd straight win, then the narrative becomes Rutgers is resurgent. They're coming back. They're building a resume, and that adds a real boost nationally. And it would be a bit poetic that the same venue, the same opponent, where this entire thing really fell apart when Mawat Mag's knee, split in half against Michigan State, and their season fell apart, and Rutgers has never really been the same since. It would be poetic if that is the launching point to this miraculous run to the tournament. It would be almost a little too poetic. To your point about the rack, right? So obviously I was at all 3 games. There were boos during the Purdue game, during the Wisconsin game, and there was until the second half of last night in this entire 3-game homestand, there was not really a moment of like the fans grabbing the game and creating this atmosphere that we become used to in the rack. I mean, in the second half, Dylan Harper gives them the lead. Rutgers is building the lead. They have momentum. You hear the first ref, you suck chants of the entire homestand. That's when you know the Rutgers fans are back, baby. They're chanting at the refs. They're doing RU chants. They're loud on defense. Like, it felt like for the first time, maybe all season, that the rack was here. And listen, I think Brad Wachtel is right. Rutgers is beyond the point of what they used to do, which is just win every game at home and win enough on the road to make the tournament. Now they have to win every game at home and win games on the road, but you got to keep consistent at home, and a big part of that has always been and will need to be the rack coming alive and kind of pushing this team a little further than I think most of us think they can go.
Right. And Pat, I think what happened, why the crowd wasn't able to get into it, like the Purdue game was a perfect example. Like they cut it to 6, and you'd be like, all right, the crowd's on its feet, ready to go, and then 6 seconds later, the bearded Smith from Purdue, the guy who looked like the Amish man from Purdue, would deliver a pass for a 3-pointer, whatever that could happen. It was like, oh, okay, so much for that. This was the first time I think they stacked defensive plays, and that's really when the energy can build, when you get stops.
Yeah, I think there's just still some bad taste of like the Wisconsin game, the way that started. Like that was an awful home experience, and just to go from the highest of high expectations to being a 500 team in the middle of January, it obviously has rubbed some people the wrong way, right? Like, but yeah, the diehards are still gonna rally for those crazy moments, and I still think if they can get to Madison Square Garden with some slimmer of hope, that is going to be, like you said, just like the quintessential, like if you're a Rutgers person, you got to be at that event.
All right, just to be clear, I'm not blaming the fans for not creating an atmosphere. Just to, it's because they were playing well. I do want to make that clear. I'm not blaming fans.
For the first time, you didn't blame the fans. I did. All right, you want to take some questions? Any other points here? We want to dive in what we got here from the Discord.
Yeah, look, I think Dylan Harper's impact offensively, like you felt it watching it. The numbers bear it true, right? The 3 games he didn't play or barely played, they didn't score. They scored under 1 point per possession, which is essentially the baseline of like good offensive play. If you're 1 point per possession or above, you're doing well. If you're below, you're not. 3 straight games, they were not. Dylan Harper comes back, they're at 1.14 points per possession, which is really freaking good, right? So the offense was much better. And I think to kind of reiterate this point, the defense had its best game of the season. They looked vintage Steve Peichel. Some of that is the old rack magic, a little bit of home cooking the Big Ten likes to sprinkle at every home arena in the Big Ten. I thought McCronin was going to explode again. They shot 31 free throws. UCLA shot 15. A little bit of physicality was allowed to happen, but that's what Rutgers needs is kind of that leeway. And
right.
I thought they were good defensively. I thought Dylan Grant is really growing into his own, and that's really an encouraging development. Someone said he's Mawat Mag 2.0. I saw that. I don't know if that was on the Discords or the message board. I like that comparison. I think he has a chance of being a little bit better offensively than Mag, and I'm not quite sure his defensive ceiling is as high. But yeah, if you can get one half of a Mawat Mag this season, you're cooking with gas.
Yeah. Dylan Harper, 18 points in 28 minutes because of foul trouble, 4 turnovers. It wasn't a perfect game. Rutgers out-rebounded UCLA 37-29. That's something you don't see. And one thing, the 31 free throws for Rutgers, only hit 21 of them. For a while there, it looked like they might only hit 12 of them at the end of the game. At least they had that stretch where they hit 9 in a row. Give Jamichael Davis, a guy who's a terrible free thrower, shooter, credit, because during that key stretch, he hit 4 of them. Where if he misses a pair, this game might have been completely different. So give him some credit for that.
Yep, Lathan Somerville too, silky smooth from the line as a center. Like that is that's a surprising development, I'd say. Like having a center that can shoot, I think he's like 80% from the line this season. It's good. It's a good thing to have when a guy, especially as physical as him, draws a lot of fouls. When you get him into the line and he can hit them at a good clip, that's always a good thing to have.
Right. All right. Absolutely. Okay. Let's dive into some questions. We've got one from the Discord about Jeremiah Williams, and it's is 6-man the perfect role for Jeremiah Williams if Rutgers is to have a resurgence? Interesting point. Took him out of the starting lineup. He's a guy who last season you thought he was going to be like you would have if you had Ace and Dylan were the 2 1 and 1A of the most obvious starters. He was the next one. So it's interesting to see him come off the bench. But as you said, you saw a controlled Jeremiah Williams after the game. He was one of the 3 players who came in to talk to the media after the game. What did he say?
Yeah, I think he put it really well. He said that there's no secret that this is one of the most talented teams in the Big Ten, and it's just about figuring it out and putting it together. And that was the sense I got that was kind of Steve Peichel's message after the Purdue game. Like, we got to just figure our shit out, guys. Like that's just it. So, and it looked like they did. Now, Jeremiah, I think, does come off the bench really well, because when him and Dylan Harper are on the floor at the same time, and I'd love to see the on-off numbers from yesterday. I'll have to look it up after the podcast, but they really play the same role as an on-ball guard, right? So they kind of step over each other, and obviously Dylan gets priority as the better player. But if he's able to come in and spell Dylan, he'll be on the ball while Dylan's on the bench. I think that's the best allocation of resources for Rutgers. I think that really was obvious yesterday. And it gives him a chance to have the ball in his hands and not feel like every time he has to do something, right? When he's off the ball, he doesn't have the ball as much, and he feels like he has to drive or throw these crazy passes or do something because he doesn't have as many chances. When he is given the opportunity to have control of the offense, he seems to be a lot more comfortable. So I think that was a shrewd move from Steve. I maybe should have come a little earlier, but I think it obviously worked out really well yesterday, and I have to think that they'll keep doing it. And I think it's really good to have a guy like Jeremiah, a veteran guy, accept that role, because it's not easy going from the guy who was the man last year to being the sixth man. But I think that the question is correct, that this is the best setup Rutgers has on its backcourt.
Yeah. Pat, 2 words: defined roles. Right, this team did not have defined roles. Can it get to that point now?
Well, it started. There were media created defined roles of like this guy is really good at this.
Right.
Like, maybe that came from Peichel, and certainly I'm sure it did. But I also think that is absolutely true. There needed to be some sort of like definitive play, for lack of a better word, and what you're seeing, that Jeremiah Williams reverse layup was probably the play of the game, right? I mean, that's really when things changed, and it was a product of like a moment that's of a guy that's been there before, who can do it, but he just has to kind of embrace that maybe being the sixth man is the best role for him. So I think that is great. I think that this question was spot on, like Brian said.
Another question. We got a bunch of these, and some of them came before this game, in fairness. But how will Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey be remembered by Rutgers fans if this is a disappointing season? You have to imagine any memory of them when Rutgers uniform would be a bad one. Sure, Harper hit a buzzer beater, but so did his brother in a more meaningful season. Will we look at their careers in the NBA as part, like the jumpstart they started here? Can we take pride in them? I think the answer to this question is what happens next. It's kind of an easy one. Like if I mean that, like, I think people will be sort of disappointed, sort of more than sort of disappointed, be very disappointed if the team doesn't make the NCAA tournament, even now. But at least if there is some kind of fight, if they drag this team back to the point, where, okay, they got to above 500, at least they're 500 in the league, at least there's some life in this season. It'll be a different vibe than it would be the way it looked like after the Purdue game. Am I right, Brian? Like, people will look at this and say, all right, it wasn't anything near what we expected, but you know what? They were great players. It didn't work out. But at least at the end, this team was fighting.
The question's a little premature. I get why it's happening after the Purdue game, because people, again, have kind of left the season for dead. Let's see how things kind of play out here. But I think ultimately, as the years go on, what's going to be remembered is what happened. Did they make the tournament or did they not make the tournament? If they don't make the tournament, they'll be, thought of as the most disappointing team in Rutgers history. I do want to make clear, though, that them personally will be remembered as one of the more talented players in program history. And what happened was the failure around them, right? I think even last week's, anonymous coaches quotes on CBS, from CBS, I should say, we're a little harsh on Dylan and Ace, right? Like, I think I've said this before. They're the last two people we should blame for what is happening at Rutgers, right? Like, Ace Bailey, sure. Could he take better shots? Yes. Why is he taking 17 difficult shots? Because nothing is happening around him, and the impetus to score is on him, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think people are being a bit harsh on these two, and the only reason Rutgers is even having a winning record right now is because they are on the team and essentially carrying this roster with them, right? So, how will they be remembered? I don't know. Let's see where the chips fall before we start writing the obituary on this whole thing and their experience.
Agreed. Totally. All right. More questions. We've got one from Twitter. How much responsibility is on Pike for not knowing his team that he's still making significant lineup changes this late in the year? And I understand Acuff was hurt early. Fair question. And I think of the Martini experience. Here's a guy who started in those 5 early games. You think, all right, well, he's definitely going to be a rotational player. And the moment he gets out there against, in Vegas against just better competition, he can't defend them. And I do wonder, did he not see that coming? Was it a surprise? I don't know. I mean, that's a great question. I don't know how many teams. I give him credit for making changes this late. You also have to wonder, where was Dylan Grant early on, stuff like that. Why didn't he play some minutes against those, against the Wagners of the world, so we knew a little bit more about him? It's a valid question.
I think there's some stubbornness of his old school philosophy of, right, these veteran guys deserve the opportunity. They're good leaders. They practice hard. They're the guys that we're going to roll with because Martini's been there before. He's been in the Sweet 16, right? Stuck with Manny Abole as the starter at center until last game, right? Like, so I think part of it is like, you still want to build this culture of how you would want to build your program like he did, right? Like that was the foundation of how he got it to this point. And when you kind of scrap that, you lose your identity, and that's not a good thing either. So I think there was some just reluctancy to change. So I guess from an outside perspective, you can criticize him from that, but I think if you really take a step back and look at it, like maybe like that's the good that he's done is because of those things.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good way of looking at it.
This was their 8th different starting lineup in 17 games. Some of that is because Ace Bailey missed a couple games. Dylan Harper missed a couple games. Tyson Acuff was banged up, but still 8 and 17 is a lot. Steve Pikiell says he doesn't put a lot of stock into the starting lineup, but I mean, the truth is like he played the worst center as a starter for 15 straight games, right? At some point, people are going to, you don't think it might not matter to him, but it certainly has to matter for Lathan Somerville, who has to be watching Manny Obole, fumble in the first 4 minutes of the game. And I'm sure they talk about it, but my point is like, this stuff does matter. And there are some, Tyson Acuff was working his way back from his foot. The Dylan Grant thing is fascinating to me because yes, he didn't play organized basketball as a senior in high school, right? He went back to Canada and then he didn't play organized basketball again until this winter. But to your point, Steve, like, wouldn't you want a guy like that, if you think he has any plans of playing the season, get 5 minutes against Merrimack and Monmouth and just kind of get his feet wet instead of just throwing him out against, I think it was Wisconsin, and saying, Dylan, do something, please save us. And to his credit, he's really shown a lot of things in these 3 tough home games against Big Ten teams. But I'm sure that he'd feel a lot better if he had played 10 minutes against the Merrimacks of the world, right? So that was certainly something worth questioning. Has he figured something out? I think, right? I think he's found something last night, and I think more important than anything, he's found the ability to make these tough decisions and forget about all this, seniority and playing time. Like, just play the guys that give you a best chance, and don't worry about any of that other stuff. Things will, as long as you win, things will kind of be figured out. And I think he certainly showed signs of that last night. If he learned it, we'll see going forward.
Right. All right. Some non-basketball, sort of basketball adjacent questions. Someone in the Discord wants to know, where in the world is Ryan Pisari? He hasn't spoken to you guys. Do we know what he's working on? He hasn't taken over Pat Hobbs' seat yet, which is fine, but why no word on him? Hey, look, great bleeping question. Now, I say this, Ryan Pisari, he's there. He's at the game. He is around. He is physically present. He's attending. But I do think it has become now, it's gone from just like a minor annoyance to the 7 people who cover Rutgers athletics closely that he hasn't talked to the media to, a big major problem. Like, I think there needs to be someone who is voicing what's happening, communicating with the fan base during this turbulent time in college athletics. It's not happening. And it's not because we're not asking. So that's the best I can tell you. I do know behind the scenes, there's a lot going on with figuring out how the $20 million from the House settlement is going to be divvied up. Other schools have given some indication as to how that's going to happen. Not a lot of them, but some of them have. Some of them in the Big Ten, Maryland, have come forward and said what they're going to do. We haven't heard that yet from Rutgers. I'm hopeful that once there's maybe more clarity on that, we might have a conversation with Ryan Pisari. But look, it's a problem. I'm not gonna lie to you. And we used to make fun of Pat Hobbs, because he was the guy waving the crowd. He was always visible. But you got to remember, before Pat Hobbs, Julie Herman, that was the problem on the other end. Like, Pat Hobbs' arrival, well, here's someone who's at least the front-facing person of the athletic department. Like, here's someone at least who can do a TV interview. Like, it's Pat Hobbs' first day on the job. He answered questions eloquently on TV, and we're all like, oh my gosh, this guy can speak. Like, he's a different beast than previously. We're kind of back to that, point where that doesn't exist. And I think that's something that's got to be solved soon. Soapbox stepping off.
Yeah. Listen, we'd all like to talk to Ryan Pisari, and as much as there are reasons for him not talking, right? Like, for example, the gymnastics investigation has still not been figured out. I still think there's a way around that. Kind of do what Umi Salim Beasley did to me and tell me, hey, I can't comment on that. There's an ongoing investigation. We can certainly go that route and talk about other things, right? So I think 4 months as the athletic director, 0 interviews with anybody, 0 public comments is totally not a great thing. Right? When the fans are noticing that the athletic director is not talking, that's a bad sign. It's been a long time. It's very clear watching him at basketball games that he is not Pat Hobbs, because I saw him. Greg Schiano was at the game last night, sitting baseline by the Rutgers bench. Ryan Piscataway goes to sit next to him and talks to him for a couple segments in the first half. Then Governor Phil Murphy shows up. Ryan leaves his seat, lets Phil Murphy take it, and walks away. I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell that Pat Hobbs leaves his seat for Phil Murphy. He tells him to take the next seat over. There were a couple of kids sitting next to Greg Schiano. I think Pat grabs those two kids and puts them in the 200s and takes their seat. So and
Pat
Ryan
sits
Piscataway
right there between the two of them with his arms around them.
No doubt. And Ryan Piscataway doesn't sit in the baseline seats. He sits in like the 100 section behind the scorer's table, a little bit away from the action. So a little different than Pat Hobbs. I don't know if it's worth reading into, what that means for where he kind of stands in this whole thing, but it clearly he needs to speak to us at some point. I think it's clear for everybody.
Pat, your buddy Kelly was at one of the games, and he was with his new wife. If you've not read the story, he got married in Vegas at the Vegas tournament. The two of them were there, and they were sitting in the third row, and they happened to be sitting in the same row as Pisari. So I texted him and said, "Hey, could you elbow Pisari and tell him to talk to us?" It was good. He just laughed. I could see him. I could see it. You can watch him watch him look at the phone, look up, look for me, and then laugh. Yeah, so it was good.
That's pretty funny. That's a good observation. But I think like Ryan Pisari has been in this role for over a decade now as a guy that's been working behind the scenes, and I think maybe that's just where he's comfortable, and that's been his role. And his job isn't necessarily as the interim athletic director to come out and make brash statements and all that too. So I'm sure there's certainly a part of that as well.
This is a good spot to do it, Brian. You mentioned being at the gymnastics meet, which I didn't even have on the script. I thought you did a great job writing the story, kind of capturing the moment. Yeah, we don't know when this report is going to drop. We think soon-ish. We've been thought that since late November, but now I think we're getting some signals behind the scenes that maybe this is coming. You went to the game. You talked to Umi Salim Peasley, game, match, meet, whatever you call it. Tell us about that experience.
One of the more interesting experiences I've had in my short career of being a beat writer. It was their first home meet of the season. They had gone to California last weekend for their first meet of the year. And everything seemed normal, right? 500 fans in the stands, parents and friends from all the 4 different schools, Westchester, Towson, Penn, and Rutgers, some cheers, some flips, and I'm not going to pretend I'm a gymnastics expert all of a sudden. But everything,
some flips. That's great. They cheered, they flipped. It's good.
Some dancing, dancing. So it all seemed pretty normal. I had requested to speak to Umi Salim Beasley and a senior on the team. To frankly, my surprise, it was granted. Afterwards I went over. I talked to her. I received maybe the firmest handshake I have ever gotten in my life. First time I ever felt like someone was trying to break my hand as they shook my hand. But she was, obviously professional, answered my questions, thanked me for coming out. Noticed that I had not been at a gymnastics meet before this year, but thanked me for coming out and asked me to write something positive about the program. My objective there was trying to just get a read on what things are like for this program in the midst of this investigation. Umi Salim Beasley told me things are business as usual. Avery Balzer, a senior who's been on the team for 5 years now, said the team has a good environment around it and they feel like they can do good things this year. So again, if you had no idea what was happening around this program and you showed up on Saturday, you would think there was nothing amiss, right? Which I guess that's what you would want if you are in the program. I am fascinated to see what comes out in this report, which I agree with you, Steve. I have to think it's coming soon. And I'm fascinated to see what happens as a result of the report, right? Like something's going to happen, whether, Salim Beasley keeps her job, whether she, there's some disciplinary action as a result of the report. Who knows? It all obviously matters what's in the content of the report. I'm kind of waiting here on pins and needles to see what they found.
Totally. Yeah. And to the broader point, we certainly never reported that every gymnast was unhappy. Like that's like it was, a good number of them in the reporting that we had. Certainly and also reporting, you cannot ignore the relationship that led to the Pat Hobbs's ouster. I mean, that was part of it. This is, so I am with you on that. What's that report going to show? Is it going to be, Pat Hobbs just completely thrown under the bus, and that would be the easy way out. But yeah, the bigger picture, I think that the recommendations part of that is going to be fascinating. Like, what do they say needs to happen going forward to prevent it from happening again? And I think that's going to be a very fascinating read for a lot of people. All right, I think we're in the what else section. Pat, are you ready to talk a little wrestling? Because I know, like, a lot of us, myself, going on the Twitter, seeing some people like, hold on to your hats, everybody. It was like this moment. Wrestling, number 4, Ohio State. Wrestling's up 15-14. 1 match to go. This could be the biggest win in program history. And I'm like, oh, I'm tuned in. I got my phone out. I'm like, let's hit refresh on this. And then, womp, womp. It was not.
Yes. The end result is going to be the same. And people are going to say, well, this is what Rutgers wrestling does. It comes so close, but just can't get over this hurdle. And there's, of course, going to be the big stat that Rutgers hasn't beat a top 10 team since 2019. And for a program that has just been so steady and very consistent, it just hasn't had that signature win. And really, this one had the makings of it. I'm sitting there watching. I'm like, oh, wow, I can't believe that this aggression that I'm seeing, these late match action, it's coming together. It's coming together. And then John Poznansky at 197 pulls out this great win to put Rutgers in a position to win it at the end.
John Poznansky in his 17th year as Rutgers wrestling. That's a name we've heard for forever. Okay,
John Poznansky, yes, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And going back to Colonia High School, even it's a very local guy. Yeah. That's probably what it is too. But anyway, great representative of the school, John Paz, and sets up a heavyweight showdown between Nick Feldman, Ohio State's, he was All-American 5th last year, versus Rutgers All-American Yaroslav Slavakuski, All-American last year. Winner of that match wins the duel, and Nick Feldman gets a takedown with 21 seconds left to win it for Ohio State. And if you're in the wrestling circles, you certainly know Nick Feldman's name. He's a guy that came in with huge expectations and is one of those guys that's supposed to rocket to the top, where Yar's kind of been scrapping and has had a great career, no question. But it always felt like it was going to take something special for Yara to win that match, and it just didn't happen. So it'll go down as another, oh my God, we're so close. But I walked away from it like, wow, Rutgers actually wrestled really well. This was like a very encouraging sign. And it's just the problem that, right, they have a match against Minnesota coming up at the end of the season. And that's one that if they wrestle the way they wrestle against Ohio State, they can beat Minnesota, and that will hopefully end that crazy losing streak. And Penn State's on the schedule, but that's a whole nother burden. But right. Yeah. It is what it is.
And I mean, I think you can't overstate how good the Big Ten is in this sport, and we've said it a million times. But man, they are close a lot not to claim some cigars every now and then. Grab a cigar once in a while.
Exactly. It's just a hard bar to measure because Rutgers is just, and the problem is coming into the season at their media day event, the whole thing was we're sick and tired of being number 13 in the country, right? And this was the season where, we're going to crack the top 10. We're going to beat this. We're going to finally do it. And obviously it just hasn't happened. So it'll be interesting, measurement at the end. Of course, this is an individual sport that ultimately gets gauged too. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. But definitely like it was an exciting moment. If you're into wrestling, like that was as thrilling of a duel as you'll ever see.
All right, really quick, before we talk some football, which we want to review the portal here, but I went to a men's basketball game. I was there for Rutgers, Nebraska, to the Kiyomi McMiller experience, and this is the best way I could describe it. It was like, talking to people, seeing what had happened, her suspension against Ohio State, the social media blowback, her not playing for mysterious reasons against Minnesota when she made the trip. That adding to, like, every day it seemed like it was just like you would think the story would go away and there was something to fan the flames and made it something that continued. I'm thinking as the game starts, I'm like, you know what, this is just not worth it. This is not worth it for Rutgers. And then it starts and you see her playing. I'm like, okay, it might be a little bit worth it. Just a little. She hits like a not even a logo 3-pointer. It was like 4 steps beyond the logo. Some of the layups she had were just, you can't even describe them, like off the top, like the far top of the glass at halftime to tie the game. I mean, everything she did in the second half, and I was keeping track of it, she either tied the game or gave Rutgers the lead 6 times in like the final 5 minutes of this game, and Rutgers still lost. But it is just like a fascinating thing where you've got this one player, no question, a bad fit programmatically, culturally. It doesn't look like it's working at any level except when she gets on the court, and you just like holy crap. She's might be the most talented player they've had. And they've, since Cappy Pondexter. There, I'm going to throw a name to you. Going back to some offensively, I mean, because as good as C. Vivian Stringer's teams were, they were never like offensive juggernauts. They won these games 41-40. They just played the 5-5 defense with her pressing, and they made turnovers. I mean, she is just a brilliant player, and it was wild to watch.
And Coquise Washington was asked about bringing her back, and she said, what do you mean? She said internal? She said nothing. She did not explain what happened.
She did not explain it. No.
There's still a lot of lack of clarity on the situation. So that's what I'm most curious of. I'd like the program to kind of just spell out what happened. Was she suspended for 2 games? Why didn't she play against Minnesota despite the fact she was not listed on the availability report? I'd like some clarity on a lot of these things, because I think that's kind of what fuels a lot of this, is that you kind of just close your eyes and hope things go away. But people want to know what's happening to the most talented player in the program that has a pretty loyal following, right? Like, you look at her on social media and a pretty big team around her that kind of fan the Flames as well.
Right. Yeah, totally. You're absolutely right. We'll see. And be interesting to see where it goes from here with them.
Yeah, obviously, like you were saying, Steve, like the individual effort of her on the court, right? They're in that game with Nebraska because of her. When she was not on the court, you saw the results. So it's like it's a real give and take situation for sure.
Right. Yeah.
To your point about fit, though, the last play of the first half, she dribbles up the court, crosses over one way, another way, gets to the rim, and finishes a floater. Right? The entire time she's surrounded by 4 defenders and doing this whole dance. She has one teammate standing in the corner, her hand ready for a 3, waving, screaming, jumping, practically going to the ceiling and not getting a pass, right? The ball went in, but you have to imagine for everyone else, it's got to be like, let me get a shot every once in a while, like there's some element of, spreading the wealth that, listen, I'm not going to act like I've watched every game. I'm not even going to act like I watched the Nebraska game. I'm just going to say that I saw that play and it immediately jumped out to me. When a player's doing this, he was open. That's all I'm saying.
I hear you. I understand. You can't, not everyone can be a women's basketball newsbreaker like myself. I understand that. It's okay. It's all right. We forgive you. Pat's got wrestling. I've got women's basketball. I don't know what you've got. We'll figure it out at some point.
Yeah. What is he? Yeah.
It's an impossible standard to me. So.
Okay. All right, let's talk a little football. Let's do it. Gregory Michael Schiano at Edward. Michael. I wanted to be Michael. Gregory Edward Schiano at the game, at the Rutgers game, on the baseline, sitting next to the governor. He was like, he's like the cheer. I love watching him cheer. I could every time they scored a basket on that side, when he would get up and he would have that really, he would with the face, with the jaw jutting out and the clapping his hands and getting going. Like Ace hit a shot late in the game. And he had just great. We stood up and went nuts. It was funny to watch. He should be happy. He should be taking a couple of days off, enjoying a college basketball game. Given that I think we can now say that this was a really stellar haul here. A couple players added late. We forgot to mention Jed Elad, the safety last week's podcast. He was before that show. But then Bradley Weaver, the Ohio defensive end, another guy up front that we've said it a million times, the biggest position of need.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing, just what everyone was seeing on the outside, Rutgers addressed internally and then some. And that's a credit to Schiano. they knew this defense was going to be completely renewed, and he went out and got all these guys. So a lot of positions of need, like revamped the defensive line, right? Like added so many veteran players on the defensive line and just plugged the rest of the players. So now it's how do these guys buy into the system? Greg Schiano's whole thing with the portal is he's recruiting guys that fit the culture. They understand what the program's built on and all that. So we'll see if that lives up to that expectation. And that's really what it comes down to for me.
A couple of thoughts from me. Someone pointed out to us that we didn't mention Jet Eli on the last episode, rightfully so, because this has a chance of Sneaky being the best addition they've made, a guy that can really come in and at worst be at the same level as Flip Dixon and maybe even be better than Flip Dixon, right? Like an athletic guy, a veteran guy who's getting essentially a second life at college football. He ran out of eligibility until the Diego Pavia settlement or a decision gave him another year, right? So I think he'll be motivated. I think he will, he has the experience. He has proven play. That's the next point I want to make is like, we've spent the last 3 years on the defensive line thinking, okay, this is the year that Aaron Lewis and Wesley Bailey put their potential and turn it into production, right? And we just never saw that. Now they bring in a guy in Eric O'Neill and Bradley Weaver who are proven producers, albeit at a lower level, right? But you've seen these guys go out and get the sacks, get the tackles for loss, create the pressures. It's a matter of now elevating and doing it in the Big Ten level. But again, it's a big difference to see a guy having done it versus seeing a guy have the tools to do it, but not quite putting it together. And the big stat of the night, Rutgers basketball is 1-0 this season. Gregory Edwards Schiano sitting baseline. Don't ever say the football program does not help the basketball program. They should curtain off the entire right side of the student section and just let Greg Schiano sit in the middle by himself.
Sit there clapping in a demonstrative way. That is too funny. Yes.
And football, also another point, right? When you bring in this many guys, right? It's such a big roster. What's going to be the other side of that now with roster caps and scholarship?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's going to be an interesting internal conversation as well going on. I'm sure that none of that information will be revealed at any point.
You'll never know.
But that's going to be really fascinating too. How does it change recruiting? How does it change development? Right? Like these are plug and play players, right? So.
Yeah. And
really
I'm also interested in that part of it. And also, it's not always that the James Madison guys go to Indiana and get to the playoff. Like that, you got to remember, like some of these guys are taking a step up in competition. And, I get it. It's a apples and oranges comparison to say, well, look what happened with PJ Hayes in the basketball team or Zach Martin. I understand that it can be different, but by the same token, it's not necessarily guaranteed that some of these guys coming from Ohio are going to be able to have the same kind of success against Penn State, right? I mean, it's just the fact of it. So I'll be interested to see how that part of it develops too. I mean, obviously you've got put them in the weight room here, put them in the Rutgers program. You got a lot of time to develop them. It's going to be interesting just to see if this works because you are taking a lot of guys who are taking a step up in competition. So,
no doubt. I think you have a perfect example on the Rutgers roster last year, right? Shedrick Rhodes came in from Ohio and didn't. I think he played a handful of snaps, if at all, right? He redshirted that year and is now coming back to try to make an impact next year. What I would say to that is that these guys, the PJ Hayes comparison isn't great. Neither is Shedrick Rhodes because these guys were role players on low major teams. Bradley Weaver was a first team All-MAC guy. Eric O'Neill was, has a chance of becoming like one of the best edges in the country, right? So obviously their production isn't going to match, but just the proof of concept, the fact they have done it, even at a lower level, at that high level, is a really good sign. On the roster thing, I am interested because I have to get the sense that the guys that you'd have in the program for a long time, these freshmen who don't really pop their first year, but you hope can kind of develop down the line, aren't going to be around, A, because they want to go somewhere where they have an earlier pathway to playing time, and B, Rutgers doesn't have the slots on his roster to just stash away a guy and hope that he's something by his junior or senior year. If you're not a guy who they see potential in by their sophomore year, I think you got to be out of here, right? I think you got to find your level somewhere else because you're taking up a spot that can be taken up by a transfer or taken up by a more potential filled younger guy, right? So it'll be interesting. I think Rutgers is well equipped to deal with that because Greg Schiano makes no bones about if you're the best guy, you will play. If you're not, you won't, right? I think everyone in the program has a good sense of where they stand. And that's where that attitude is valuable in this situation where you're not catching guys off guard. Young guys aren't thinking, hey, I thought I was next in line. Like, where you stand, and whether you want to stay in or go out, those things are kind of pretty well established. And that helps kind of keep the culture that we always talk about, alive and well.
Yeah. All right. And this thought just occurred to me before we sign off. Are you guys watching the playoff? Yeah. I'm watching it.
Yeah,
I mean, enjoying it and observations from the Rutgers standpoint. I watch Ohio State and I'm like, oh, how was this like? What happened during the regular season? Like you just look at that team and you're like, okay, Ryan Day, you lost to Michigan. Like it's just their payroll $20 million and it's a bargain. Someone wrote on. I saw Roger Sherman wrote on Twitter or whatever. It's true. I mean, I don't know what are your thoughts overall watching it, how, and maybe if it does apply to Rutgers, how it applies to Rutgers.
You want to talk about Notre Dame, Brian, or no?
I'll pass talking about Notre Dame.
Yeah.
It's been there's this one very big Notre Dame fan who tweets at me every time. I think every tweet I've muted her. She tweets at me every time about how I ranked Notre Dame lower than every other team and how I was wrong. And
where did you have them ranked? I don't remember this. Where were they?
Like 10th. I had them a couple spots below everyone else because it seems like the entire country had collective amnesia and forgot they lost to Northern freaking Illinois, dude. They lost to a MAC team, and I'm supposed to rank them top 4? All right, like what? Because they beat big game James Franklin in the semifinals. All of a sudden, they're a top 2 team. Get out of here, man.
You just hate the Irish. You're anti-Irish.
And the Catholics, apparently. But I just thought that as I said on this podcast before, the results matter. And now look, I was proven wrong in an extent that Notre Dame made it to the final. They haven't played anybody, Paul. If they beat Ohio State, I'll be impressed. Which to the Ohio State point, right? Like the fact they have been demolishing everyone is an enormous indictment on Ryan Day and his coaching staff and their unrelenting incompetence that they have this juggernaut of a team. They have an NFL team in college football and they scraped by Nebraska and they lost to Michigan, right? Like I, as opposed to being impressed with what they're doing, I am distraught at what they did in the regular season. And people were calling for Ryan Day to be fired after losing to Michigan. If they win a national championship by 21 points, I think he should be fired the next day for not winning by 50.
I think they're going to win by at least, and this is my prediction. Let's end with a prediction. I think they're going to stop Notre Dame in that game. They're going to win that game easily. Pat?
Yeah. No, I'm gonna say Notre Dame's been like just playing just as well, sneakily, like sneaky good football, and so I think it's gonna be. And like, I'm not all in on this Ohio State's creaming people, right? Like maybe. Okay. I think Notre Dame has a real shot, so I'm gonna take Notre Dame for the upset.
There you go. All right, tiebreaker.
Ohio State 48, Notre Dame 24. I mean, they're just so much better, and Ryan Day's literally coaching for his job.
It's just crazy.
So, I'm wondering what what Rutgers fans who they're going to be rooting for. Are you rooting for the Big Ten team? Are you rooting? I don't think Rutgers fans have a strong feeling either way about Notre Dame, but is Rutgers kind of like the SEC conference alignment kind of people? Or are they? I know for a fact if Penn State was in this final, they wouldn't be rooting for Penn State. Do they have a softer spot for Ohio State?
I don't know. I do love the differences in our jobs. We're all sports writers, but the people who cover Ohio State are like, how dare they lose in the national championship game? People who cover Rutgers are like, hey, Rate Bowl runner-up, it could have been worse.
Well, the difference is also in the fan base. The Rutgers loses, there's about 1,000 people who are grumpy for a couple days and they get over it. When Ohio State loses, Ryan Day's address is being posted on every corner of the internet, and some of the most vile things I have ever seen on Twitter have come from Ohio State fans when Michigan is up by 3 points in the third quarter. Like some genuinely disgusting things people have said. Yeah. It just means more in Columbus. To love something is to go all in. And there's no doubt that Ohio State fans love their Buckeyes, man. More than
I'm sticking with you, folks. I'm sticking with you, the Rutgers fans. I do not want that in my life. Do not want. Wouldn't change jobs with those guys covering it to see a few more victories, to go to some nice places and cover bowl games and write books and be on TV and have a bigger career. I would not change any
Make
of
more
that.
money.
Make more money. I would not. Right here. I'm staying with you guys forever. die. Let's sign off on that note.
They say mean things about Steve Politi, the Rutgers fan, the committed Rutgers fan, the man of the people.
Stay forever. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll be back after sometime next week. Have a couple basketball games to recap. Until then, appreciate it, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Rutgers Rant. To participate in the conversation and receive live updates about the Scarlet Knights directly to your phone, sign up at NJ.com/insider.